For those that don't know me, I white knight the hell out of CCP in-game and on the forums. I've been accused of being a dev alt, been called a shill more times than I can count, and have even made a video called White Knighting CCP. All of this is to say is that this isn't going to be the rant of a bitter vet. That being said, I was indeed turning into a bitter vet a few years back and even made an outrage video that many of you may remember. While I think my attitude and outlook has evolved since then, I still want to be careful not to repeat my past mistakes. I mean, if there's one thing I want to avoid, it's to convince a bunch of people to quit. However, that doesn't mean that I think I should remain silent. I may be upset, but I have not given up on Eve. I love this game, and I do think it's worth fighting for. Hopefully you do too. So, I am about to do a fair amount of criticizing. However, it's not to ruin anyone's fun or to convince anyone to quit. There have been instances of player pushback causing game companies to change monetization methods, so this is me pushing back. I'm also trying to convince as many people as possible that they should be pushing back as well. Let's face it, there are a significant amount of people right here in Eve who want pay to win, and there are others who don't understand why people are making such a big deal out of all this. So yeah, this is a bit of a tightrope. I want people to be adamantly opposed to pay to win, but I also don't want them to leave either. Alright, long story short, I believe that many of CCP's recent monetization efforts are pay to win and or detrimental to the long-term health of the game. Now, to be clear, I am not opposed to all monetization. Naturally, player opinions on monetization can vary, and many of you will disagree with me on some of these things, but I support subs, cosmetics, Plex, skill injectors, the Hypernet relay, and the proposal to sell name change certificates. So, I am not living in a fairy tale world and demanding that CCP return solely to a sub-based model or anything. Nor do I automatically dislike any new monetization method that is implemented after I started playing. I understand that the monetization landscape has changed considerably within the gaming industry over the years, and that CCP does indeed need to adapt or die. However, there are many ways a game can be monetized, and I would prefer it if CCP used monetization methods that weren't anti-consumer, pay to win, and or detrimental to the long-term health of the game. Alright, that's enough background. Let's do some constructive criticizing. For those that don't know, much of the community is in an uproar because CCP recently started showing an ad to new players when they lost their first ship. Of course, new players have always been able to buy Plex and use it to make stupid decisions, but to encourage newbros to respond to loss with buying Plex both angers and demoralizes me. It makes me feel like they don't care about their newbros or the long-term health of the game. Hilmar said a few years back that he had contemplated putting Eve out to pasture, but had decided against it. This ad says the opposite. It says, we don't care if we are doing a disservice to newbros. We don't care about player retention. We're just trying to get paid before most newbros leave. And if that causes damage, well, we already got paid. I don't know if that's what's going on here, and there is another explanation that actually makes a lot of sense, which I will talk about. But the fact remains is that there have been multiple examples of games trying to milk their player base of as much money as they could before the server shut down. And when players see things like this ad, that is what they think. Allow me to elaborate. First off, there are a large number of players out there who hate pay to win and who actively try to determine where a game lies on the pay to win spectrum when they first start exploring a game. They will actually Google if a game is pay to win, and once they start playing, they will continue to assess whether balance or gameplay has been compromised in order to incentivize microtransactions. Because that is something that a lot of games have done to one extent or another. So, when you hit them with the ad like this early on, when they might not even understand why they lost their ship, a lot of them are going to assume the worst and leave. Lord knows I would have if I had seen this ad when I was still deciding on whether or not I was going to keep playing. Second, this ad does a disservice to those that do stick around. You cannot microtransaction your way to victory in Eve. It is your brain's attitude and determination that will determine your success. It is your ability to learn from your mistakes and to keep getting back up no matter what. Needless to say, I believe that telling newbros to respond to loss by buying Plex is absolutely terrible advice. It will not help them to learn and grow as players, and will likely just lead to a lot of anger and frustration. And the thing about this is that this isn't just my opinion. Even CCP thinks that the magic moment is a critical moment in the Capsulier's career. I mean, that's why they call it the magic moment.
Devastating loss is really like, we now call it the magic moment. Like the moment you lose your first spaceship is the moment where either you have enough understanding of why it happened, or you have the social network to help you through it, then you play forever. If you don't, you immediately quit and never come back. Understanding why it happened, a ray of hope that you can respond and get back on your feet and get revenge, and social support during the magic moment. That is what makes an elite EVE player.
So for CCP to turn around and try to monetize that moment with a microtransaction, to tell new players that they should respond to loss with buying Plex as if they can buy their way to success, it's like a betrayal. I don't know how else to describe it. It's like they're fine with sabotaging newbros if it means that they can squeeze a couple of dollars out of them. It makes me feel like this isn't a creation that they're passionate about, but a product that they're just trying to milk. Hell, this doesn't just sabotage new player retention, but also veteran retention. I don't know if they were incompetent and had no idea what kind of subtext players would get from this ad, or they did know and they didn't care, but it seems rather obvious to me. I mean, of course vets would see this as a sign that CCP was trying to milk newbros at the expense of the next generation of EVE players and the long-term health of the game. Of course, just because vets interpreted it that way, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what they were trying to do. So, let's talk about it. So, I watched some videos about monetization, and it was interesting to peer into the thought processes of the money men. Now, I am sure that some of them are indeed slimy douchebags, but they aren't all cartoon villains. They mostly seem to be regular people who are doing some motivated reasoning, which means they are simply regular people. But let me give you an example. So, this girl says at one point that the industry shouldn't call them whales, that they shouldn't think of them as such. They are players who are passionate about their games. But then she goes on to discuss how to psychologically manipulate players into spending more money. And the fucked up thing about it is that she's being smart about it. I mean, if you are a director of monetization and you aren't thinking about things like anchoring bias and the sunk cost fallacy, then you're not very good at your job. Oh, and on a side note, all manner of businesses are trying to manipulate you into buying their products. So this isn't something that's isolated to the gaming industry.
Women, you're leaking, aging, hairy, overweight, and everything hurts. And your children's clothes are filthy. No wonder men long for other, less clammy women. For God's sake, sort yourself out.
Anyway, the money men have noticed things like correlations between how long a player plays and money spent. So it's quite possible that they thought that they were doing a good thing. They not only get a few bucks out of newbros, but also increase the chances that they stick around. After all, if you spend money, you're more likely to stay, right? Right. Brilliant. Capital idea. Let's celebrate our genius by sucking each other's dicks. Anyway, long story short, they didn't necessarily prioritize short-term profits over the long-term health of the game. They could have actually thought that it was a good idea. Of course, the recent ad isn't the only thing I'm upset about, so let's take a look at some of the other crap CCP has been doing. First up, selling SP directly to players smacks a pay-to-win, undermines the player-driven economy, undermines the reason why CCP implemented diminishing returns on injectors, and has no positive side effects. Now, I do believe that EVE is still a skill-based game. However, once again, perceptions of pay-to-win will cause vets to leave and newbros to stay away. So there is a cost in player acquisition and retention. Of course, I don't have the metrics, so I don't know how big that cost is, but considering CCP keeps baby stepping in the pay-to-win direction, I have to assume that it's offset by the money they're bringing in. But even if it's not stupid from a financial position, I'm still upset because it means that there are fewer players in a game that is built upon player interaction. Oh, and did I mention that even CCP seems to think that selling SP directly to players is a bad idea? Now, technically, they never actually said that, Nor did they actually say that they would never sell SP directly to players, but they certainly fucking implied it. From the dev blog on skill trading. It's very important to note here that this means all the skill points available to buy on the market in EVE will have originated on other characters where they were trained at the normal rate. Player-driven economies are key to EVE design, and we want you to decide the value of traded skill points while we make sure there is one single mechanism that brings new skill points into the system. Training. So, I have to ask, did they decide that they were wrong, or have they just prioritized monetization over their own values and their own vision for the game?
I can answer that. For money.
Speaking of which, injectors were meant to help newbros catch up to vets and not help vets pull ahead. Of course, I won't assert that injectors don't have any problems, because many vets do use them to quickly spool up specialized alts. However, selling SP directly to players just throws all that out the window, because it allows vets to completely circumvent injector penalties. In fact, the only reason why I haven't completely lost my shit over this is the fact that CCP has been limiting the rate at which players can buy SP. Don't get me wrong, this is not enough to make it okay in my book. It's merely enough to keep me from rioting. Also, I've heard it argued that selling SP allows new bros to catch up to vets, so I want to address that. Now, I adamantly disagree with the idea that new bros are forever disadvantaged. However, I'm going to turn that into a video of its own. Right now, I want to point out that because CCP has been limiting the rate at which players can buy SP, it means that vets effectively get to buy more SP by virtue of being around longer. Of course, selling unlimited SP is undoubtedly worse because it allows vets to circumvent injector penalties, but that still doesn't mean that this is good for new bros. Anyway, one of the reasons some people like pay to win is because they feel like it helps them to catch up to and be competitive with older players and or those who have more time to play the game. However, you cannot microtransaction your way to success in EVE, and selling SP directly to players actually benefits the vets more than it does the new bros. Alright, so what the hell do I mean by no positive side effects? Well, let's take a look at Plex to see what I mean. So yes, Plex can be bought for cash and turned into non-cosmetic in-game items. However, the way that is done is by selling the Plex on the in-game market to people who want to buy that Plex for ISK, and then using that ISK to buy goods from players. This means that people that never spent any real-world money can actually benefit from Plex purchases. You have player loot and goods getting bought, it's used for wealth storage and as an investment vehicle, and a lot of people use that Plex to spin up other accounts that give an advantage in PvE and or PvP. Now, I do know that many people are opposed to the alt-focused nature of EVE, but even if you are, the fact remains that there are still plenty of people who can't pay for a single sub. This might be due to their financial situation, terrible exchange rates, ridiculous payment fees, or even just a lack of payment options. So, Plex does allow many players to go Omega that otherwise couldn't. Moreover, Plex also competes with RMTers, which decreases their profitability. This helps to push them to other games and limit the amount of damage that they can do to EVE. Thus, Plex has a ripple effect that benefits far more than just the original purchaser. And of course, player skill is still the at least for the time being, it's still the single biggest factor in determining outcomes. So, I give Plex a pass. Don't get me wrong, in my perfect world, nothing that could possibly affect game balance would be sold. But we don't live in my perfect world, and so I understand that some concessions need to be made. That is why I defend Plex, skill injectors, and the HyperNet relay. And yes, I do support the HyperNet relay. I know a lot of people don't, but I have enough to cover, and I don't want to regurgitate arguments that I made elsewhere. And on a side note, I am kind of glad that CCP did recently implement a monetization method that I like, as it shows that I'm not automatically opposed to all new monetization. Anyway, it just feels like CCP compromised on their own stated values. They're compromising on the health of the game in order to increase profitability. And if that wasn't already enough, they added insult to injury by saying that they did understand our concerns and that they would make changes, and then just kept on selling more SP directly to players. Alright, next up we have selling skill books directly to players. Once again, it smacks of pay to win, it has no positive side effects, and it undermines IS-Syncs. Oh, and many people have pointed out that a lot of the packs that CCP has offered have actually been bad deals, like you're better off just buying Plex, but this is almost a positive in my book. Yes, customers are getting a bad deal, but at least it's limiting the amount of damage the packs can do by limiting the amount of people that buy them. But I digress. Anyway, some people have justified this one by saying that you could always just convert Plex to ISK and then buy the skill books. However, when you do that, you inject Plex into the economy and take ISK out of it. Now, a deep dive into IS-Syncs and faucets is beyond the scope of this video. So the main thing to note is that because players can essentially print money in MMO economies, inflation has to be managed very carefully. It does have to do both. They have to limit how much money players can make, as well as introduce things that can take money out of the game. And if you want to know more, I'll link to a couple of extra credit videos in the video description down below. Now, truth be told, I don't have compelling evidence that the direct selling of skill books had a significant effect on the skill book IS-Sync. However, I am still worried that they're going to introduce some packs that do have a significant effect. And 2, it's adding insult to injury that they're doing this in the age of resource scarcity. I mean, incomes are down, prices are up, people are pissed, and CCP is undermining the effectiveness of an IS-Sync with a pay-to-win microtransaction. Honestly, I'm kind of surprised more people didn't get pissed off about it because I'm a white knight who's made a butt ton of money during scarcity, and even I think that's fucked up. Next, we have the selling of items directly to players. It's pay to win, has no positive side effects, and it undermines the player-driven economy. Now, I would not go so far as to say that it's been doing a ton of damage, but it's still bullshit that they're doing it, especially during the age of resource scarcity, because they are chipping away at people's incomes by magicking items into existence. Once again, I think that the damage so far is minimal as they have limited themselves to cheap, widely available items, but it's still bullshit and it sets a dangerous precedent. And yeah, I'm sure some of you are going to bring up the slippery slope fallacy. Well, I got news for you. The slippery slope argument isn't fallacious when there's good evidence that the slope is real, and CCP has clearly been pushing monetization in a pay-to-win direction. I mean, at what point do we admit that this is a trend? And you might not think that CCP would take things too far, but they've already crossed lines that I didn't think they'd ever cross, and they have already gone against their own stated values. Okay, let's be real. Pay to win is not inherently evil. Different players have different tastes when it comes to gaming, like preferring competitive or cooperative play, theme park versus sandbox, and casual versus hardcore. And some players not only have a greater tolerance for pay to win, but some actually prefer it. I mean, there is a reason why pay to win is so common within the gaming industry. That being said, I didn't sign up for a pay to win game, and I don't particularly appreciate CCP baby stepping in that direction. Let me put it this way. Imagine if you went home with a girl, she was riding you reverse doggy style, and then she squeezed out a deuce on your stomach. Some people might be into that sort of thing, but it's not what I signed up for, and as far as I'm concerned, it kind of ruins the experience. Anyway, pay to win's influence on gameplay isn't the only drawback. A lot of players hate it, and it can have an effect on player population and composition. Now, I don't think I need to convince anyone that there are a lot of gamers out there that will avoid pay to win like the plague, so I'm not even going to bother to argue that point. But I do want you to consider this. What type of players do you think are more likely to avoid a pay to win game versus those that are more likely to stick around? I looked up why some players like pay to win in order to understand it better. Turns out there are multiple reasons why some people are down with it, and I'm not entirely unsympathetic to some of them. However, one of the reasons is that many players believe that they need to pay is so that they can be competitive with others who have an unfair advantage. In other words, so that they can compete with the vets who have been playing longer, people who have more time to devote to the game, or who they believe to be otherwise advantaged by game balance and mechanics. Of course, this might actually be the case for some games, but it's just not true for EVE. It's a defeatist attitude that frequently stands in the way of people's success. And that matters to me because This is exactly the kind of attitude that leads people to lobbying for things like perpetual nerfs to hunter playstyles, server resets, and the casualization of EVE. So yeah, I am worried that this is going to change the composition of the player base. It's going to result in rising numbers of players with a low internal locus of control and a lot more people asking for a kindler, gentler EVE. And as their numbers rise and they fork over more and more money, CCP is more and more likely to cater to them. I don't know. Maybe I am wrong on my assessment, and maybe I am making some pretty big leaps of logic here. But at the same time, this is not a completely unreasonable assertion. Selection bias is a real thing, and the players who are down with pay to win tend to have different beliefs, values, and priorities than those who aren't. Speaking of which, many people are asserting that CCP is intentionally chipping away at pay to win opposition by baby stepping. Instead of just going all out, they seem to have adopted a strategy of pushing the boundary a little at a time. And every time they do it, some of us get fed up and leave, and our numbers grow smaller. Now, to be clear, this is a conspiracy theory. I have no idea what's going on in the minds at CCP. But whether they are doing it on purpose or not, that is the effect that they are having. It's kind of like that bacterial experiment that shows bacteria evolving an increased tolerance for antibiotics. You just can't hit them up with a lethal dose or they die. But if you give them time, they'll eventually develop resistances to higher and higher doses. So, whether intentional or not, CCP is hitting us with higher and higher doses of pay to win, and it is making our community more and more tolerant to it. And that really has me worried. But I didn't make this video to bum everyone out, make people quit, or to sabotage EVE. Of course, I'd be lying if I didn't say I was worried, but it's not all doom and gloom. For one, seeing outrage to the ad actually gave me hope. It means that there are still plenty of players out there who are opposed to pay-to-win bullshit. Second, CCP is not a monolith. I know that there are devs that don't like this either. They may not be able to voice their dissent publicly, but I guarantee you that they exist. And hopefully I can give some of you guys hope as well. Let me put it this way. I believe that skill, attitude, and determination currently determine success in EVE, and I would not continue to play this game if that ever stops being the case. So, think of me like your canary in the coal mine. As long as I'm still playing EVE, that means that it hasn't turned into a pile of pay-to-win garbage just yet. Hopefully it never gets to the point where I decide to extract, but for now, I am going to put up the good fight. Of course, I will continue to speak out against pay-to-win monetization methods wherever I can, but I'm also going to be fighting for other issues that matter to me, beginning with non-consensual PvP. You also have options as well. First, you can write your CSM and tell them how you feel about things such as monetization. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm sure a lot of them don't give a shit about what some randos think. And at least one rep openly admitted that he stopped reading people's mail. However, there are community candidates such as Brisk and Mike who do listen. And various candidates are sympathetic to various playstyles and values. So you should definitely write your CSMs about things that matter to you. And maybe make sure to make a clear and concise subject line. That way, even if they don't read every grammatically challenged rant that gets sent their way, they can still get a feel for community sentiment. Second, make your concerns known on Reddit, the forums, and any discords where the devs are active. Once again, many people claim that the devs don't listen, but that's just not true. Now, sometimes it might feel like they have their heads shoved up their asses, and there's certainly room for improvement, but they are listening. So, make your values and concerns known. Just try to be civil and constructive with your feedback. I know we got a bunch of Karens that think that being paying customers gives them the right to bitch, but no one wants to hear it. Like, are you going to sit there and listen to someone bitch at you? Because I know I wouldn't. Third, amplify the voices of creators that share your values by liking, commenting, and sharing. This helps to get their content in front of more eyes, including impressionable newbros, and it signals to the devs what is important to the player base. Fourth, make your own content about things that matter to you. It doesn't have to be hour-long podcasts or highly polished YouTube videos either. Even something as simple as a forum post can have an impact. Fifth, Stop buying this shit. And if you aren't already buying, then keep pushing back. There have been examples of companies reversing course when there's enough player pushback, and it's even happened right here in Eve. So don't give up, don't relent. Alright, that's it. I am going to start trying to upload more frequently, and I already have a list of topics that I want to talk about, so we'll see how that goes. In the meantime, like all the things I like, hate all the things I hate.